Everyone rejected the disfigured bride at the station, but a silent rancher took her hand and led her to his cabin. The train whistle echoed across the dusty plains of Colorado Territory as the locomotive pulled into Willow Creek Station on that scorching July afternoon of 1879. Steam hissed from the iron beast while passengers stepped onto the weathered wooden platform, their boots creating small clouds of dust with each step. The sun beat down mercilessly, casting harsh shadows between the station house and the handful of wooden buildings that made up the small frontier town. Among the travelers was a woman whose presence would change everything in ways no one could have imagined. She stood alone beside her worn leather trunk, her face partially concealed by a dark blue bonnet that seemed too large for her slight frame. The fabric of her simple gray dress was clean, but showed signs of a long journey, wrinkled from hours spent in the cramped passenger car. What happened next would haunt the memories of everyone present that day, yet also become the beginning of something beautiful that none of them could have foreseen. The woman reached into her small cloth purse and withdrew a crumpled piece of paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it, revealing an advertisement that had been placed in the Denver Post weeks earlier. The words were simple but desperate. Seeking companionship for life on working ranch. Honest woman desired for marriage. Write to Thomas Mitchell, Willow Creek Station, Colorado Territory. She had responded to that advertisement with hope in her heart and determination in her soul. The correspondence that followed had been brief but promising. Thomas Mitchell had seemed kind in his letters, speaking of his cattle ranch and his desire for a partner to share the challenges and rewards of frontier life. He had asked for no photograph, stating that character mattered more than appearance. Now she stood waiting, scanning the faces of the men gathered near the station. Several cowboys leaned against the hitching posts, their hats pulled low against the blazing sun. A few townsfolk had come to meet arriving passengers or collect supplies. The station master emerged from his office, checking his pocket watch and calling out departure times for connecting routes. But no one approached her. No one seemed to be looking for a bride. Minutes passed like hours as the woman remained motionless beside her trunk. The other passengers had been greeted by family members or business associates and had moved on into town or climbed aboard wagons heading to distant homesteads. The platform grew quieter as the locomotive prepared for its next leg of the journey. Finally, she gathered her courage and approached the station master, a portly man with graying whiskers and kind eyes. She showed him the letter and asked about Thomas Mitchell. The station master scratched his beard thoughtfully before pointing toward a group of men standing near the general store. "That there is Tom Mitchell," he said, indicating a tall man in his 30s wearing a clean white shirt and black vest. "Been waiting here near 2 hours, he has." The woman's heart raced as she walked toward the group. Each step felt heavier than the last. When she reached the men, she cleared her throat softly and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, are you Thomas Mitchell?" The tall man turned toward her voice and his expression changed instantly. His eyes widened, then narrowed as he took in her appearance. The other men gathered around him fell silent, their conversations dying mid-sentence. "I am," he replied, his voice colder than the mountain streams that fed the valley. "And you would be?" "Margaret Whitman," she said, extending her hand. "I have come in response to your advertisement for a wife." The silence that followed seemed to stretch endlessly. Thomas Mitchell made no move to take her offered hand. Instead, he stepped backward, his face showing a mixture of shock and something far worse, disgust. The left side of Margaret's face bore the unmistakable marks of a severe burn. The scarred skin pulled tight across her cheek and jaw, creating an uneven texture that caught the harsh afternoon light. Her left eye was partially closed by the damaged tissue, giving her face an asymmetrical appearance that drew immediate attention. "There has been some mistake," Thomas said finally, his words cutting through the air like a blade. "I was expecting someone different." Margaret's hand slowly dropped to her side. "I understand that my appearance may be unexpected, but I assure you that I am capable of all the duties you mentioned in your letters. I can cook, clean, tend animals, and work alongside you to build a proper homestead." "The answer is no," Thomas said firmly. "I cannot possibly—" He gestured vaguely at her face, unable to finish the sentence. The other men had begun to murmur among themselves. some shaking their heads in apparent agreement with Thomas's decision. Margaret could hear fragments of their whispered conversations, words like unfortunate and shocking and poor thing. One of the cowboys, a young man with a scraggly beard, spoke up loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe you should head back east, miss. This territory is hard enough on folks who start with all their parts working proper." Laughter erupted from several of the men, though it was nervous laughter, rather than genuinely cruel. Margaret felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, the unmarked side of her face flushing red while the scarred side remained pale and rigid. "Please," she said, her voice growing stronger despite her humiliation. "I have traveled over 800 miles to be here. I sold everything I owned to afford the train ticket. I have nowhere else to go." Thomas Mitchell adjusted his hat and looked anywhere except directly at her. "That is not my concern, miss. I placed that advertisement in good faith expecting a normal woman. What you have done by coming here under false pretenses is dishonest." "I never claimed to be beautiful," Margaret replied, lifting her chin with quiet dignity. "Your advertisement asked for an honest woman of good character. Those qualities I possess in abundance." "Honesty," Thomas scoffed. "An honest woman would have mentioned her condition in her letters." The cruelty of his words hit Margaret like a physical blow. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that a man seeking a wife on the frontier might value practical skills and loyalty over conventional beauty. She had been wrong. Other potential suitors who had been waiting hopefully near the station began to drift away. Word spread quickly through the small crowd that the mail-order bride was damaged goods. Margaret could see the disappointment and rejection in every face that turned toward her, then quickly looked away. The station master approached, his expression sympathetic but firm. "Miss, I am truly sorry, but you cannot remain here on the platform indefinitely. Do you have funds for return passage?" Margaret opened her purse and counted the coins inside. After purchasing her ticket to Colorado Territory and meals during the journey, she had less than $3 remaining. A ticket back to Philadelphia would cost at least $25. Money she simply did not have. "No," she whispered. "I do not." The crowd around her was growing larger as word spread of the spectacle at the train station. Margaret could feel dozens of eyes upon her, examining her scars, judging her worth, finding her lacking. Some faces showed pity, others showed disgust, but none showed acceptance. She considered her options, which were few and grim. She could throw herself on the mercy of the local church, hoping they might take in a desperate stranger. She could try to find work in town, though her appearance would make that nearly impossible. Or she could simply walk into the wilderness and let nature take its course. As these dark thoughts filled her mind, she became aware that someone was approaching from behind. Heavy footsteps moved steadily across the wooden platform, accompanied by the soft jingle of spurs. The crowd parted slightly to allow the newcomer to pass. Margaret turned and found herself looking up at a man unlike any of the others who had rejected her that day. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with weathered hands that spoke of years of hard labor. His clothes were practical rather than fancy, worn denim pants, a simple cotton shirt, and a leather vest that had seen better days. His boots were scuffed and dusty, the boots of a working man, but it was his face that captured Margaret's attention. A long scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, cutting through his eyebrow and creating a pale line against his sun-darkened skin. His left eye was clouded and sightless, the result of some old injury that had healed but left its permanent mark. Like her, he bore the visible signs of violence or accident. Like her, he would never be considered conventionally handsome. Unlike the others, he did not look away when their eyes met. The man said nothing as he studied her face, his good eye taking in her scars without flinching or showing disgust. Margaret found herself holding her breath, waiting for another rejection, another cruel comment about her appearance. Instead, he extended his hand toward her. "Ma'am," he said in a deep, quiet voice, "my name is Samuel Carson. I have a cabin about 10 miles north of here, and I could use help with cooking and keeping house. If you are willing to work, I am willing to provide food and shelter." Margaret stared at his outstretched hand, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You would take me in, even looking as I do." Samuel's scarred face softened slightly. "I reckon we have both seen trouble in our time. Maybe we can help each other." The crowd around them had grown quiet. watching this unexpected development with fascination. Thomas Mitchell and his friends looked on with expressions ranging from confusion to disgust. "You cannot be serious, Carson," Thomas called out. "Look at her. She is damaged beyond repair." Samuel turned toward Thomas, his voice remaining calm but carrying a note of steel. "So am I, Mitchell. So is half the territory. We make do with what we have." Margaret felt tears threatening to spill from her eyes, the first tears she had allowed herself since beginning this journey. For the first time since stepping off the train, someone was treating her like a human being rather than a curiosity or an object of pity. "I accept your offer, Mr. Carson," she said, placing her hand in his. His skin was rough from years of ranch work, but his grip was gentle and reassuring. Samuel nodded once, then walked over to collect her trunk. He lifted it easily and carried it toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. Margaret followed, aware that every eye in the crowd was watching their departure. As Samuel helped her up onto the wagon seat, she heard Thomas Mitchell make one final comment. "You will regret this decision, Carson. That woman will bring you nothing but trouble and embarrassment." Samuel did not respond immediately. He finished securing Margaret's trunk in the wagon bed, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. Only then did he turn back toward Thomas. "The only thing I regret," Samuel said clearly, "is that it took so long for someone to show common decency to a lady in distress." With that, he clicked to the horses and guided the wagon away from Willow Creek Station. Margaret sat beside him in silence as they rolled through the dusty streets of the small town. She could see curious faces peering at them from windows and doorways, but she no longer cared about their stares or whispered comments. The wagon headed north, along a well-worn trail that wound between rolling hills covered in sagebrush and scattered pine trees. The Rocky Mountains rose majestically in the distance, their snow-capped peaks gleaming in the afternoon sun. Margaret had never seen country so vast and beautiful, so different from the crowded streets and brick buildings of Philadelphia. "How did you come to be scarred?" Samuel asked after they had traveled several miles in comfortable silence. Margaret touched the damaged side of her face unconsciously. "A fire in the tenement building where I lived with my family. I was 12 years old. My mother and younger sister did not survive." "I am sorry," Samuel said simply. "And you?" Margaret asked. "How did you receive your injury?" "Bull caught me with his horn during roundup 3 years back. Tore up my face something fierce and took the sight from my left eye. Makes judging distances tricky sometimes, but I manage." They spoke little else during the journey, but Margaret found the silence comforting rather than awkward. Samuel seemed like a man who did not waste words, who said only what needed saying. After years of pitying looks and whispered conversations about her appearance, his straightforward acceptance was like a gift. The Carson Ranch appeared as they crested a low hill. The main cabin was built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney that rose above the peaked roof. A covered porch ran along the front, providing shade during the hot summer days. Several outbuildings were scattered nearby: a barn, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, and what appeared to be a workshop. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures that stretched toward the foothills. Margaret could see that Samuel had built something substantial here, a working ranch that could support a family if properly managed. "It is not fancy," Samuel said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it is solid and comfortable. The roof does not leak, and the stove draws well." Margaret looked around with genuine appreciation. "It is beautiful, Mr. Carson. You have created something wonderful here." Samuel seemed pleased by her response, though he showed it only with a slight nod. He carried her trunk onto the porch and held the door open for her to enter. The interior of the cabin was simple but well built. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with comfortable chairs arranged nearby. The kitchen area featured a cast-iron stove and a sturdy wooden table. Shelves lined the walls, holding books, tools, and household supplies. "There is a bedroom back there," Samuel said, pointing toward a doorway at the rear of the cabin. "You can have that. I sleep in the loft." Margaret noticed a ladder leading to an upper level where she could see the edge of a bed and some personal belongings. "Mr. Carson," she began, then stopped. "What exactly are you expecting from this arrangement? I do not wish to misunderstand your intentions." Samuel removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door. "I need help with cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, tending the vegetable garden. In exchange, you get food, shelter, and protection. Nothing more complicated than that." And if I prove unsatisfactory, if you decide you no longer want me here, then we will discuss other arrangements, Samuel said. But I do not make decisions lightly, Miss Whitman. If I say you are welcome here, then you are welcome here. That first evening, Margaret prepared their supper using supplies from Samuel's well-stocked pantry. She made beef stew with vegetables from his garden, biscuits from scratch, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Samuel ate with obvious appreciation, complimenting her cooking skills. "Been eating my own cooking for 3 years," he said. "This is the first decent meal I have had in longer than I care to remember." As the days passed, Margaret settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, tended the vegetable garden and chicken coop, cleaned the cabin, and had hot supper waiting when Samuel returned from working with the cattle. She discovered that Samuel was not only a skilled rancher, but also an educated man. His shelves held books on subjects ranging from agriculture to literature to history. In the evenings, they would sit by the fireplace and read, sometimes sharing passages aloud or discussing what they had learned. Margaret found herself looking forward to these quiet conversations more than she had anticipated. Samuel had opinions on many subjects and was not afraid to express them, but he also listened carefully to her thoughts and treated her ideas with respect. "You mentioned in town that you sold everything to come west," Samuel said one evening as they sat watching the fire. "What was your life like before?" Margaret set down her mending and stared into the flames. "After the fire that killed my mother and sister, I went to live with my aunt and uncle. They were not unkind, but they made it clear that I was a burden. My scars made it difficult to find employment and impossible to find a husband through normal means. So you answered a mail-order bride advertisement. It seemed like my only chance for independence. I wanted to build something of my own, to be valued for what I could contribute rather than pitied for what I lacked." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. "And now, do you regret coming west?" Margaret considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "Even if this arrangement proves temporary, I have seen country I never dreamed existed. I have learned that there are still decent people in the world. That is worth something." "This arrangement does not have to be temporary," Samuel said quietly. Something in his tone made Margaret look up from her sewing. Samuel was studying her face in the firelight, his expression serious but not unkind. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean that you have brought something to this place that has been missing for a long time. You have made it feel like a home, rather than just a shelter." Margaret felt her heart begin to beat faster. "Mr. Carson," "Samuel," he corrected. "And what I am trying to say, badly, is that I would be honored if you would consider making this arrangement permanent, as my wife." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from the fireplace. Margaret sat perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. After the humiliation at the train station, she had not dared to hope that any man might want her as a wife. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know that you work harder than any hired hand I have ever employed. I know that you are intelligent and kind and brave enough to travel 800 miles to start a new life. I know that you have never once complained about the isolation or the hard work. But my face—" Samuel stood up and moved to kneel beside her chair. "Margaret, look at me." She turned toward him, her scarred cheek catching the light from the fire. "I see a woman who has survived tragedy and chose to keep living. I see someone who makes this cabin feel like a home. I see strength and dignity and grace." Tears began to flow down Margaret's cheeks, both the scarred side and the unmarked side. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you want me when men like Thomas Mitchell find me repulsive?" Samuel reached up and gently touched the scarred side of her face, tracing the damaged skin with his fingertips. "Because I understand what it means to be marked by life. Because I have learned that true beauty has nothing to do with perfect features. Because in the past month, you have shown me more kindness and companionship than I have known in years." Margaret closed her eyes and leaned into his touch. For the first time since the fire that had changed her life forever, she felt truly accepted, scars and all. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I will marry you." Samuel smiled then, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. It transformed his scarred face, making him handsome in ways that had nothing to do with conventional features. They were married the following month by the circuit preacher who traveled through Willow Creek every few weeks. The ceremony took place on the porch of their cabin, with the mountains providing a magnificent backdrop. A few neighboring ranchers attended, along with their wives, and Margaret was surprised by how warmly she was welcomed into the small community. Thomas Mitchell was notably absent, though Margaret had heard through local gossip that he had eventually married a woman from Denver whose primary qualification seemed to be her conventional prettiness. The marriage had reportedly been troubled from the start, with his wife finding frontier life far more challenging than she had expected. Margaret felt no satisfaction in hearing of Thomas's difficulties. If anything, she felt grateful that his rejection had led her to Samuel. She could not imagine being married to a man who valued appearance over character, who would have spent their entire marriage looking at her with regret or embarrassment. Samuel, by contrast, seemed to take genuine pride in her accomplishments and capabilities. When neighbors complimented her cooking or her vegetable garden, he would beam with satisfaction. When she successfully treated a sick calf or helped deliver a difficult foal, he praised her skills openly. Their first winter together tested them both. Snow fell early and heavily, cutting them off from town for weeks at a time. The isolation might have been unbearable with the wrong partner, but Margaret and Samuel found they enjoyed each other's company even when confined to the cabin for days on end. They played cards, read books aloud to each other, and worked on projects to improve their home. Samuel taught Margaret to play chess, while she taught him some of the songs her mother had sung to her before the fire. In the evenings, they would sit close together on the sofa he had built, sharing warmth and companionship while the wind howled outside. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Margaret planted an expanded vegetable garden and started raising turkeys in addition to chickens. Samuel purchased additional cattle and began improving the range with better fencing and water systems. They worked together as true partners, each contributing their strengths to build something larger than either could have achieved alone. Margaret's organizational skills and attention to detail complemented Samuel's practical knowledge and physical capabilities. Most importantly, they had found in each other what both had thought lost forever: the acceptance and love of another human being who saw past their scars to the strength beneath. One evening in late spring, as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. "Do you ever think about that day at the train station?" she asked Samuel. "Sometimes," he replied. "Do you? I used to think it was the worst day of my life. Now I think it might have been one of the best." Samuel took her hand in his, their wedding rings catching the last rays of sunlight. "How so?" "Because it led me here, to you, to this life we have built together." Samuel squeezed her hand gently. "The people at that station saw only what was broken about us. They could not see what was strong." Margaret smiled, touching the scarred side of her face without shame. "Their loss?" she said simply. "Their loss," Samuel agreed. As darkness fell over the Colorado Territory and the first stars appeared in the vast sky above their ranch, Margaret Carson, no longer the rejected mail-order bride but a woman who had found her place in the world, felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her home. Sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as rejections. Sometimes the people who see us most clearly are the ones who have learned to look beyond the surface. And sometimes, in the harsh and beautiful landscape of the American frontier, two scarred souls can find in each other exactly what they need to heal and grow and thrive. The train whistle that had announced Margaret's arrival in Willow Creek had long since faded into memory, but the life she had built in its wake would endure for generations to come.